for those of you joining us on this gorgeous September evening to talk about emergency shelter and supportive housing in Clark County. My name is Laura Ellsworth, and I am the Strategic Partnerships and Advocacy Manager with Council for the Homeless, and happy to be here with you tonight. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And we decided to cover this topic right now because there are several new developments in our community that a lot of you have heard about recently. And so we wanted to give you the latest information straight from the people who are, proposing and coordinating these programs. So we'll talk about the different services and upcoming projects that are happening in our community. First, just a bit of housekeeping. As we get started, like always, the only people that you can see and hear are our hosts and panelists, so relax, you're not on camera. We will send out a recording of this webinar and post it to our website within the next week or so. And please help us with providing your feedback after the webinar by taking the short survey that will appear in your browser. It'll be a little pop-up as you exit out of the meeting tonight. And we really do appreciate the feedback, especially about what you would like to know more about. It helps us plan future webinars, and we really appreciate that. So tonight, I'll start with a big picture overview of capacity here in Clark County and briefly cover the basics about emergency shelter and housing programs for people experiencing homelessness. Then we'll get into our panel discussion with our wonderful guests tonight. And as always, we will end this webinar with some calls to action. So thank you so much for joining us. The main things about emergency shelter are that it isn't permanent and a person in it is not housed. So when a person is in a shelter, even if it's for a few months at a time, they are still considered to be homeless by HUD. And I also want to point out that some shelters only serve specific populations. For example, Share House only serves single men, the What Shelter only serves single women, Family Promise only serves families, and etc. Emergency shelter can sometimes be in a dedicated building like Share's Homestead or Orchards Inn, or it can be in a church sanctuary or a gym floor with sleeping mats. It's a place where people access some supportive services and get some basic needs met like food, bathrooms, and showers. In Clark County, we have 232 year-round beds for emergency shelter, and listed here are several of the providers, not all of them, but several of them for emergency shelter. During the winter months, we have seasonal emergency shelter, like the Winter Hospitality Overflow, which is just getting ready to enter its 19th season. They're open November to March. And then we have severe weather shelter during times when the weather gets below freezing that together adds around 100 beds of emergency shelter during the winter months. And this is when the severe winter weather shelters open. They open because it's not only cold and rainy in our winters, but sometimes we get that below freezing weather that comes down in the form of snow or freezing rain, or even on those clear cold nights when it gets below 32 degrees. You'll see some of the amazing faith community partners in this effort listed here. You'll also notice motel vouchers listed as a type of severe weather emergency shelter. And also the Q&I motel that was implemented last year during COVID with temporary financial support from Congress. Church shelter efforts are mainly volunteer driven and add a crucial element of support to our homeless crisis response system. And I also want to give a shout out to community partners and churches who stepped up during the recent heat waves to provide daytime respite from the extreme heat that we saw this last summer. This was a real community effort with other partners like the Clark County Food Bank, Fort Vancouver Library, CRESA, 211, and really just so many caring community members that we heard from all over Clark County who delivered water and supplies to folks outside. We also have 88 transitional housing beds in Clark County. And this is time limited housing, usually 2 years. And again, this type of housing is also population specific, with places like Janus Youth serving youth headed households, and some focusing on families or only, or singles and couples only. Again, there's a variety of providers who do transitional housing in our community. Here are just some of them. And then permanent supportive housing is housing with intensive supports for people who are most vulnerable in the community. Often those are those who are chronically homeless. Here are just a few of the many permanent supportive housing site-based and scattered site programs in Clark County. As you can see, housing for 673 households seems like a lot, but there is currently a waiting list of more than 900 people in Clark County who qualify for permanent supportive housing. And rapid rehousing is a time-limited rent assistance program in scattered site rental units that are paired with supportive services for people exiting homelessness. And these people will fall into that medium to high level range of needs and vulnerability. And with the right level of support and progressive supports that are appropriate for the resident as they transition towards stability, the household is able to remain in housing once the program ends. You'll see listed here some of the programs available in Clark County, and some focus on specific populations like BIPOC or LGBTQ headed households. Some are recovery based. Some have been funded by the City of Vancouver's Affordable Housing Fund, which was approved by voters in 2016 and is a 7-year property tax that generates about $6 million per year for affordable housing and homelessness services. Okay, so after all of that, here's a list of phone numbers for some of the organizations that you saw on previous slides. You also may have noticed, many different organizations under different services, and that's because a lot of those service providers offer a wide variety of services and types of housing and emergency shelter. A good place to start is always the Council for the Homeless Housing Hotline. But for people fleeing domestic violence or youth or families, these are some other good places for people to call. So as you can see, there are many hundreds of households being served through emergency shelter and housing programs in Clark County, but the need far outweighs the supply. In 2020, about 1,800 households requested shelter and about 1,600 received it, which is actually up quite a bit from previous years. And that had to do with all of the additional funding that came in because of COVID. You can see that about close to 3,000 households were eligible for housing programs, but just less than 500 were placed. With the moratorium on evictions due to income loss because of COVID beginning to end, and the continued economic and health impacts of the pandemic still raging, it's likely that more people will fall into homelessness as we navigate the coming years. As you can see, 2/3 of people who asked for help in 2020 had never touched the homeless system before. And pre-COVID, the largest increase in homelessness was the senior population in Clark County. So with all that being said, I hope this gives you an idea of where we are in this community in regards to shelter and housing. And we have a great panel of speakers tonight who are here to talk about some existing, new, and developing programs to provide emergency shelter, transitional housing, and permanent supportive housing in Clark County. I'd like to introduce first Nick Leiter from Catholic Community Services. Nick serves as Catholic Community Services Southwest Regional Network Builder for the Catholic Initiatives for Poor Families and Communities. He's been in the lead in the development of Bertha's Place, a 62-unit non-congregate shelter for single women, couples, and individuals over 55 experiencing homelessness in Clark County. Andy Silver is the Chief Operating Officer at the Vancouver Housing Authority, where he also serves as Executive Director of Columbia Nonprofit Housing. Columbia Nonprofit Housing operates a portfolio of about 400 apartments that serve seniors who have low incomes, as well as supportive housing for people with disabling conditions. In his role as COO, Andy oversees the supportive services and voucher departments at the Vancouver Housing Authority, as well as the Housing and Health Innovation Partnership, which works to strengthen and expand integrated housing services and treatment options for people with complex behavioral and/or physical health conditions. Jamie Spinelli is the Homeless Response Coordinator for the City of Vancouver and has provided direct service to those experiencing homelessness in Clark County since 2009. And most of that has been street outreach and case management. She has worked for several different organizations and also spends much of her off time contributing to grassroots efforts like the Shower Outreach Project, the Fourth Plane Pit Stop, and the Pocket Guide. Her entire career has been devoted to building relationships with, providing support to, and advocating for the needs of folks living outside in our community. And Chris Tababin grew up on a small farm in Ohio. He spent 8 years in the Marine Corps and is still active in the reserves. He's a business owner and supply chain consultant, improving local and global processes. Boy, I think we are in need of that right now. He is married and a proud father of 4. He has a BS degree in political science from Miami University and an MS degree in supply chain management from Syracuse University. So Nick, let's start with you. This type of non-congregate shelter in former motels is a pretty new approach, and I've been hearing a lot of good things about it, and I know our community is really interested in it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for welcoming Catholic Community Services into the group of providers here in Vancouver and Clark County. We're really excited to be doing this work. We're really excited to be really bringing in this way of providing shelter. Clark County and Vancouver is in the lead on this, stepping forward. Catholic Community Services has had some experience, really in the course of the pandemic, shifting to providing shelter in hotels, obviously for everyone's safety. But this is, to my knowledge, the first time that this is going to be an owned hotel. The Vancouver Housing Authority, Andy Silver and other folks at the Vancouver Housing Authority have seen fit to purchase the facility and own it. A lot of the other experience we've had have been really that just renting rooms in a hotel. So this is going to be an exciting experience. I want to share a little bit about the design of the shelter, how it's going to work, how to get people in. And obviously the big question that we're all working with is when. I can give you my best answer on that. And then I think at the end, there'll be a little bit of room for questions. So yeah, it's really an exciting venture where this is an old hotel. This is right near the Vancouver Mall. It's an old Howard Johnson hotel. As you mentioned in the intro, the populations that we're going to be serving are single women, couples with a female head of household, and people over 55. In large part, that we chose those 3 subpopulations because that was what the leaders in Clark County said the greatest needs were. I will say one caveat is we thought about children and families, but one of the things that we heard was if we focused on singles and couples and single women, there'd be an opportunity for other family shelters to release some of the capacity they're currently holding for single women and allow the community as a whole to have more spots. It is going to be to get anybody into the shelter. We're contracted with Council for the Homeless, so the regular coordinated entry system is the way to get people in, and people will be chosen based on vulnerability. So the outreach teams, the current way that everybody's getting people in is the way that will be bringing people into the shelter. It's going to be a 24/7 access shelter. The front desk is going to be staffed around the clock. People will it'll be secure access, so people will be buzzed in by staff at the front desk, and residents households will each household have their own room. We will be, using the old hotel key card system. So if you've checked into a hotel, there'll be the little magnetic strip. So and similar like at a hotel, if you lose that, the front desk can give you a new one, that kind of a thing. Um, One of the goals of the program is really having the ability, as challenging as it is, and you mentioned that a lot in your intro, to get people returning to permanent housing. So one of the key features there will be each person will have a case manager whose job it is to work with them to identify both their strengths as well as the challenges they have, and help them regain permanent housing. Um, in terms of the way it will look for folks at the facility, each room is going to have their own. It's an old hotel, so we there's not a commercial kitchen there. There was an old, the waffles and cold cereal section. That was about the most we could do there. But what we're really going to be doing is bringing in um, both prepared and unprepared meals through a set of volunteers. So if there's anybody who wants to volunteer and help with that, we very much appreciate that. Each room is going to have a mini fridge and a microwave. Um, yeah, I think we're going to be one of the big questions that everyone is wondering is, when are we going to get started? It's starting far later than any of us wanted. There did need to be a considerable amount of construction. And I'll be meeting with Vancouver Housing Authority and other folks' teams later this week to get an update. But we're hoping, cross your fingers, that construction will be completed midway through or near the tail end of October. And then we're in the process of hiring right now, and we'll be staffed up. So as soon as we can possibly do a week or two or three, or after that, to launch things up. And then when we launch, I would say, if you have people who are interested in getting in, be in really great communication with your those outreach teams and people at the Council for the Homeless, and we will bring people um, in groups, and it takes several days, probably several weeks to staff up to fill the facility up to the 62 units. They will be year-round units. They will come online and they will remain online. We're really excited to work with other providers in the community, and we have designed staff or space on site for outside providers to come in and do work with the residents there. I'm sure there's lots of other questions that people might have, and I'm sure we'll be able to address at least as many of those as we can in the chat. That's what I can share at this point, and I'll pass it back for others on the panel.
All right, thank you so much. So yeah, if you enjoy, volunteering if you are one of those people that likes to play with the waffle machine at the continental breakfast at the motels, maybe there'll be a volunteer gig in your future. All right, thank you so much, Nick. That was great. All right, so next I would like to pass it over to Chris. Chris, everyone is so excited about Sea Roots. There's so much buzz going on. I know you have a big ribbon cutting, I think is it tomorrow or Thursday?
Yeah, Thursday
Yeah.
we have the ribbon cutting.
Yeah, so yeah, tell the people about Sea Roots. What do you have for us?
Excuse me. So Community Roots was founded by from the ideas of Hector Hinoza. He, in his process of running Stone Soup, interacting with folks, he recognized that food was a component of what he was giving, but in reality, he had there was obviously a lot bigger problems. So he went out and trying to put together a team. That team became Sea Roots. Sea Roots got the 501c3 And then we sought to define our mission as providing tiny homes for folks exiting homelessness. And so as we interact with folks like Jamie Spinelli and other experts in our community, we honed in on this niche that kind of we've arbitrarily described as phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 housing. So phase 1 is your shelter, kind of what the Catholic Charities were talking about there, getting people off the street, providing immediate care. But it has a relatively short timeline to it, and it might not have wraparound services associated with it. But it's an immediate response. Then that phase 2 is something more like Clean Street or PIC, where you're having wraparound services provided. You have some type of shelter provided to you, but the idea is that after 6 months, 2 years, you're moving on to your own devices at that point after stabilizing, whether it's mental health or substance abuse crisis that created the situation for homelessness. So we focus in on what we think is one of the leading contributors to recidivism or re-entering the unhoused or unsheltered community is having stability at a small scale that's affordable for folks that have shown maturity in their healing process, whether it is from mental health or substance abuse, and have the ability to re-enter a home if they was just more affordable. And so we partnered with the city, we partnered with Craft 3, now we're partnered with Lewis and Clark Bank and the state to get the money to build a 21 tiny home and 1 remodeled home off of Fruit Valley Road, just south of Burnt Bridge Creek trailhead. And so working with partners like Clean Street, like CMAR, PIC, we're working on a collaborative effort with LULAC, identifying those folks that have shown maturity and getting them moved in. So we've had the first 3 folks moved in March of 2020. It kind of refined the process, worked out. We've had a lot of success there. There have been 5 people have moved through. 1 person did begin using it again and was pushed, or it was moved back into a wraparound services program that was ready to help them. So that you don't get necessarily pushed out, you just get moved into the appropriate fit. We've had 1 person move on, working and as far as we know, doing pretty well. And then we have 3 folks in there now that have all become, they've started working, they're contributing, they're stable, and we're seeing the success there. We have 6 more people moving in this Friday after the ribbon cutting Thursday. Everyone on here is invited, obviously. 12 o'clock, we're going to start showing up. We'll be there till 3, but speakers and some folks like that starting around 1. The idea, though, is that we recognize that there's an enormous number of folks in the community that can provide superb services, but there's just flat out not enough affordable housing for them to put for people to live in. And so even if they have the ability to have those services delivered, they don't have a place to go to rest their heads at night. Or if they do, they have to depend on roommates and things of that nature, which are notoriously unreliable and depend on a developed and healthy social structure that might not be there from spending time in a homeless environment. So we are extremely excited. The community has been wonderful. We've got donations of stuff starting to roll in. If people are interested, they're welcome to donate. We have a list of like needed items that we can share with people. We don't want to just, we can't do what the Goodwill does and take everything. So we have kind of tailored the effort. The tiny homes themselves, if people are interested, they're 308 square feet. They are $650, and that includes per month to stay there, and that includes the all utilities, all the fees for the program, wraparound services, things of that nature, and it's age in place, so they can stay there as long as they see fit. So we have it's a blended community. They're just the folks we have now. We have several women, several men, veterans. Children moving in with some of the single parents. So it's going to be a community of people sympathetic to the hardship of their neighbors and recognizing that they'll have a place in the not just their well-being, but the well-being of their neighbors. So hopefully this is I don't know, enough information. If anybody does have questions, though, please find us on the interwebs via Facebook. You can find team at c-roots.org or info@c-roots.org. Get more information that way. We're pretty quick to respond.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll try to get that posted into the chat too, or I think you might be able to do
I can throw
that.
it in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's great news. Yes. Awesome. It's so exciting. All right. Well, next I'd like to toss it over to Jamie. I know people are really interested in the supported campsites that the city is considering and would love an update on that with any information that you have.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I was hired in February of this year at the city, and part of my role here has been to develop and implement a plan to address and mitigate the impacts of unsheltered homelessness specifically. I'm sure probably everybody here knows, but in case some people don't, the homeless population is more than just the people that you see outside in tents. But my job here at the city is to address the folks that you see in the tents. So we do that. The city does that in a variety of ways. We do that with our HEART team, which is kind of the city's own outreach team, which includes Officer Chavers and myself, although that will include someone in a public works department sometime next month. It includes sanitation sites that are near encampments across the city. Those are dumpsters or trash service, porta potties and hand washing stations, large solid waste cleanup at encampments. And that's really just meant to kind of keep things cleaned up in the short term. In May, I presented a plan to council, which they supported, that starts, I believe, kind of moving us in the direction of solutions, like a transitional plan for the immediate future. And that includes maintaining all those cleanup efforts and establishing some sanctioned and supported campsites, as well as creating additional safe park sites, just like the one that we currently run. The most recent update on the campsite project actually happened last night. So there's a public hearing on the amendments to the camping ordinance that were needed in order to establish the campsites. And that ordinance was passed last night, which is very exciting. So that ordinance allows for these campsites to exist. It also created an exemption, a nighttime workers exemption for folks who need to be able to sleep during the day. Previously, that was not allowed because our camping was only allowed from 9:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. So now that is allowed. And then it's going to create some camping impact areas where it will not be allowed ever at any time. And that's really just kind of very close to our important like environmental areas like the waterways. So the next step in that process is to present the proposed contract for a site manager to council next Monday for approval. And then we move, we're kind of doing all this simultaneously, honestly. It's hard to give you like a step-by-step. The other piece of what was approved last night was the site selection criteria for where we can potentially place supported campsites. So at this point, we can start narrowing down to some properties where campsites can be placed based on that criteria, go through the public notification process, and then start preparing that site for setup. And then also working with the provider on how it's going to operate day to day. In general, I think the campsites, I don't have a lot of details on how they're going to operate day to day, but I can tell you that it's my desire and intention to have them be safe, stable, and supportive places for people currently living outside as they work to resolve their homelessness and transition to something more permanent. There will be some kind of code of conduct. That really long message just totally distracted me. There will be some kind of a code of conduct, but I have asked site managers to work together with camp residents to come up with their kind of community agreements or code of conduct. I've also asked that they hire in some way at least one camp resident to assist with day-to-day operations. So whether that's some kind of a stipend or something like that, I'm really wanting this to be a bit of a hybrid kind of managed / self-governed situation. I think that, oh, I should probably just give you the details. There'll be no more than 40 people per camp, so 20 tents, or we could potentially transition into like little pods or shelters. But 20 of those per site, because we have a lot of couples outside, there could be as many as 40 people in each campsite. Those will be fenced, they will be managed. They will be spread around the city so that we're not overburdening any one particular area. Trying to remember if there's any more details. I think that's like the nitty gritty of it. Did I answer all the questions, Laura?
Let's see. Let me check my notes. I think you did. Thank you. And, for those of you who attended our webinar last month when we talked about that person-centered, trauma-informed approach, I think you'll hear a lot of that reflected in how Jamie has talked about this program and how things are going to be implemented. So we'll try to, if anyone has questions, pop them in the chat. We'll try to answer them. It looks like Chris had an opportunity to put some information in the chat as well about referrals for CROOTS. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add. I know sometimes it's easier to just talk. So type.
No, yeah, so we're partnered with organizations at this point, the Clean Street PIC, CMAR, potentially LULAC here soon. So we aren't taking direct applications from the community at large.
Okay, great.
Oh, I didn't address that, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah.
So we don't have all those details hammered out, but my hope is that we're able to take referrals into the campsites from pretty much everywhere. So law enforcement, outreach, self-referral, etc. Alongside the contracted provider, we'll figure out whether or not they have like an application process or a specific referral process. But I do want, at a minimum, outreach and law enforcement to be able to refer in.
Great. All right. Thank you everyone so far. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to turn it over to Andy Silver to talk about permanent supportive housing and affordable housing. And I know that there has been some recent projects that have opened up, and also there's more in the pipeline. I know there's been kind of an unprecedented amount of funding that has been allocated for this because our state representatives are recognizing this is a big need. So in our state legislature and the federal government as well. So if you could just share with folks, what's going on, maybe talk about, the differences between permanent supportive housing and low income housing. And maybe also talk about the Affordable Housing Fund locally. I know it's a lot, so I'll just let you organize your thoughts and talk to folks about it.
Thanks, Laura. That's a nice, narrow topic.
Yeah, yes.
I guess I'll start a little bit with supportive housing or permanent supportive housing. And the way I think about supportive housing is that it's housing for people who need supportive services in order to stay stably housed. So often we're talking about people with severe mental illness, maybe physical health conditions, substance use, or combination, all of the above. And often people are coming into supportive housing straight from encampments or emergency shelter, or many of the programs that we've been talking about this evening. So we're in our community, we're in the midst of a pretty major expansion of supportive housing. And that's both what we call site-based supportive housing, where you build a building and everybody who lives in that building is part of that supportive housing program, and the services are on site. And also what we call scattered site, where people have a rental assistance voucher that they can use to rent an apartment, and the services are provided wherever they end up. So the Vancouver Housing Authority has been involved in both efforts with a host of nonprofit partners. Council for the Homeless subsidiary, the Housing Initiative, has developed a few supportive housing properties over the last couple of years and is in the middle of construction on the Meridian, which is going to add another 46 apartments to the mix. The VHA is nearing the end of construction on Tenny Creek Assisted Living, which is going to be a first of its kind assisted living supportive housing for people exiting homelessness who have behavioral health conditions, trying to fill a big gap that we've seen in the community for a while, where people sometimes in our supportive housing really have those additional needs for assistance with daily living activities. And in the current system, there's just nowhere that's going to serve that population. So that's really exciting. And overall, what we've tried to do, and I think what's unique about our community in a good way, is that because we don't have the scale of some other communities, if you look at Seattle, there's an organization called DESC that has thousands of units of supportive housing and does everything in house. In Portland, you've got Central City Concern and others. And in our community, we don't necessarily have nonprofits of that size and scale that can do everything in house. So what we do well is we team up together, and through Housing Initiative, the Housing Authority, Columbia Nonprofit Housing, Share, CDM Caregiving Services that's been providing excellent personal care services to the population, Peace Health, and the Family Residency Program that's been providing primary care on the physical health side, and CMAR, CSNW, Lifeline Connections, Columbia River Mental Health. We've created this network of services that are sort of interconnected in the supportive housing that's helping people get in and stay housed. And I think we're seeing the results of that. Lincoln Place, for example, which is our longest, I think we're over 5 years now that Lincoln Place has been open. In the beginning years, there were some challenges sort of figuring out the model, figuring out the service mix. And now we see over a 90% housing stability rate, which is really great. So affordable housing, sort of in the sense of income restricted housing, where the rents are restricted and you have to be under a certain income level to live there, is a much broader part of what the VHA does. It doesn't mean there aren't any support services offered in those types of properties, but they're more on a sort of a if somebody needs it, and usually can get connected in the community, versus a population, a building where really that's a necessary part of the housing, almost intertwined with the housing. So I think one of the really interesting things right now in the time we're living at is we're at an unprecedented amount of need, both locally and nationally, what we're seeing in the housing market and what we're seeing with a disconnect between incomes and the cost of housing. But we're also, it seems, at sort of the precipice of a potential historic investment to respond. We've seen some of that investment come through in the emergency rent assistance, and also in some of the state investments in the Housing Trust Fund locally, and things like the city's Affordable Housing Fund. But right now, the discussions that are happening on the federal level that I urge everybody to get involved with, on from the budget to the potential infrastructure bill, they're discussing massive investments in housing and affordable housing that we've never seen before in this country. So one example, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is the main program in our country, where if you don't have enough income to rent in the private market, you can qualify for a voucher that you can shop around and take and find a place to live. Right now, nationally, only about 18% of people who are eligible for housing choice vouchers actually receive one. which is unlike food supports or healthcare these days, or other basic needs where if you qualify based off your income, you can receive that. And there are serious proposals, working their way through Congress to sort of make that a universally accessible program over a period of 3, 4, 5 years. So that we would just see, I mean, that would be the quickest. I often get asked, if you could wave your magic wand, what would you do around sort of the needs we see in the community? And there's not one thing that's ever going to fix every problem, but that would move the needle in such a dramatic way. It's hard for somebody who's lived in the scarcity world of affordable housing for a long time to wrap my mind around it, but I urge you all to get involved.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. So if each of you could leave with everyone with a call to action tonight, what would you suggest?
I'll go first. The theme of this is, it takes all different types of ideas and applications of effort. All of us have different backgrounds. I have no personal affiliation necessary or background in responding, but it just takes an amount of persistence and grit to achieve a reality that other people have kind of laid out, and I was just part of the execution for that. What I would say is that anybody listening, what I'm hoping is that, our community of 21 folks, we have the ability to create passionate people that are now going to be, to a degree, service members for the community at large, being that they are sympathetic and empathetic to the realities of other unsheltered. But even if the people on here don't have any ties, they can still do a whole great deal of things, and it really just comes down to a persistent action towards a task or an end state. So like Jamie's tent effort, which I think is absolutely spectacular, and it's going to be extremely hard, and it's going to be very tough for the community to handle, but it's necessary and essential. She's going to have things that are going to be necessary. The city can't do it all by themselves. So I would say it simply comes down to aligning yourselves with an organization that you feel is moving towards the right direction, and asking how to help. And then doing that not just on one time, because that's useful, don't take me wrong, but it's doing it on a routine basis, like an hour or two a month. That way the organizations, they know that they can call you and say, oh, we have Chris, he can help. He said he's got an hour per month. I haven't talked to him this month. Chris, we've got something that's about an hour. Are you willing to do it? And it's those types of habitual relationships with organizations and teams that will allow them to actually build a capacity that might not otherwise be there. So one, be willing to commit to something, and then two is being willing to stick with it for 6 months to a year.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can. My ask is difficult, I think, for a lot of people. It's uncomfortable for a lot of people. But one of the things that I have learned over the years is that the reasons that people become homeless are often very different than the reasons that they remain homeless. And we're not going to solve homelessness unless we address both of those. And we cannot address both of those unless we are building relationships with the folks experiencing it, and getting to know what is it that caused you to fall into this, and what is keeping you here, because it's different for everybody. And building those relationships with folks takes willingness, it takes consistency, it takes community building, and a lot of time. And that community building work is very hard. It can be emotionally taxing. But it is absolutely necessary. So for those who are comfortable or willing to figure out the best way to go about doing that, I don't think that we're going to figure out how to solve this if we are not kind of bridging the gap between those who are unhoused and those who are housed.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. So I hesitate to say anything because there's been so much that's been said. Yeah, Rory is saying in the chat that Jamie said it's really what she said is incredibly beautiful. The thing that I would add to what you're saying, Jamie, is that most people who are homeless who are homeless for less than 1 year, and so there is this huge pool of people out there who've been homeless in the past, and there's a huge pool of people out there who are going to become homeless, and unfortunately there's also a way too large huge pool of people who are currently homeless. And so part of it is change the mindset that, wow, there isn't a lot of difference between me and the folks that are out there. There could be something that could be happen to me in terms of a health crisis, a family crisis, some kind of, you know, some kind of really challenging situation that could put me out there. Uh, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, who's like a school counselor, has a master's degree, had to was renting a place and needed like to demonstrate 5 times the income necessary to rent a place. He had to get somebody to co-sign for them. Not everybody has that in their lives. I'm not sure I would be able to have that in my situation. So one is it changing the mindset between that divide, there but the grace of God go I. That's number one. So that's the internal ask. The external ask is, oh my gosh, what Andy Silver's talking about. If you could put like a shoulder to the grindstone or an email to Congress or some kind of support on that, again, with what Chris said, and not just a one-time, but a sustained pressure to change the rules of the game here. If we had that kind of thing for affordable housing, this isn't inevitable. This is something that we as a society are choosing about how to solve this problem. And we could have all of these incredibly difficult social service challenges, but be working with folks in housing to address those challenges. Yeah, I mean, really, the big picture comes down to put me out of a job. I'd much rather go on to doing something else and not be leading in homeless shelters. There's plenty of other work to do. So give me a reason to have a career change.
Amen to that. I think I jumped the gun a little bit with my call to action, but I'll add to it. So don't just reach out on the policy stuff, although that's extremely important. But my ask for sort of on the theme of sort of looking inward and reflection is on how we think about housing in general. So we've chosen in our country to make housing a commodity. And that is really at the root of a lot of what's happening. And I know when we think about homelessness, we often think of behavioral health, we think of domestic violence, we think of different issues than the housing market. And those issues are real, and those issues cause people to become homeless. But what causes homelessness on a community level, and what drives the rate of increase in homelessness or decrease, is the cost of housing and the relationship between cost of housing and incomes in the community. And a lot of what we do is just putting a Band-Aid over the fact that we've made housing a commodity. And I think, ultimately, if we're gonna really solve this problem, we need to think about some radical change. What percentage of housing in our community needs to be owned by mission-driven entities in order to withstand the ups and downs of supply and demand of housing, of the housing market? How can we rethink zoning and land use to really meet the needs of every single person who lives in our community, and not just the ones who, are above 80% of area median income. So that's my ask of people, is just to sort of is to start having those conversations, because it's got to start somewhere.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all so much. We are so lucky to have your expertise and thoughtfulness informing our webinar tonight in our community. And I will just share my screen again here. And we will finish up tonight. I really do want to thank everyone for attending tonight. You know, you heard from our panelists and learned about the different tools that are required to help people experiencing homelessness. It's, you know, it's a big toolbox. There's a lot of different tools that are a good fit for some and maybe not so much for others, but all are needed. So thank you for being here tonight to seek knowledge, and please share it. You know, I heard a lot about empathy and, you know, engaging in advocacy and activism, and you know, building those relationships with community members from all the different panelists tonight. So it really does tie into things that we say often during our webinars. And so I just really want to reiterate those calls to action. You know, you can engage with elected officials about investments into low income and affordable housing, and really also about how to create places for people to be, you know, places like shelters and camps for people who don't have housing right now, and to address those immediate needs. Everyone needs to be somewhere. I heard that once at a conference. And, you know, everyone will be somewhere. They'll be outside, they'll be in a house, they'll be in jail, they'll be in a hospital, but everyone will be somewhere. And so we as a community can help encourage and support safe and humane places for people to be. And I do ask you, you know, we've had such a thoughtful panel here tonight, and I encourage you to think critically about homelessness. And critical thinking feels uncomfortable. It should challenge what you thought you knew. If you're just thinking and you're agreeing with what you already thought you knew about something, that's not really critical thinking. That's actually something called confirmation bias, which we are very much all prone and guilty of. So I appreciate you all being here tonight. If you haven't already, you can sign up for our e-newsletter, our action alerts, which are directly related to advocacy work at our state and local level here in Clark County. I send out action alerts pretty regularly during the legislative session and really throughout the year. You know, share the data and the facts that you've learned, dispel those myths, and reduce the stigma of homelessness. And as always, last but not least, be kind. We always end our webinars with that. I really thank you again for being here. For those of you who attended our webinar on the impact of street outreach in August, we look forward to presenting part 2 of that webinar on our street outreach system partners in October. That's going to take place on Tuesday, October 26th, same time, same place, 5:30 to 6:30. So hope to see you then. And again, thank you everyone for being here tonight. We really appreciate you, and hope to continue seeing you at future webinars. So take care, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Laura.